Usually, when a baby is born, the air fills with laughter and relief. Parents weep with joy, and the cries of a newborn mark the beginning of a new journey. But in this hospital room, there was only tension and silence, pressing down like an invisible force. What could be the heartbreaking reason? Stay tuned to find out in today's story. But before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Melissa and David stood frozen, eyes locked on the tiny baby in the doctor's arms. Their child. Their son. Dr. Rachel, a seasoned physician who had delivered hundreds of babies, had seen all kinds of reactions from new parents. Fear, exhaustion, disbelief. But this was different. Melissa's hands trembled as she reached out, hesitated, then pulled back. "Is he okay?" Her voice cracked. Dr. Rachel offered a reassuring smile, but there was something behind it, something forced. "He's perfectly healthy." But Melissa and David weren't looking for health. They were looking for something else. Perfection. The baby had a swollen face, faint birthmarks spread unevenly across his soft skin, and tiny hands that curled inward, not like a perfect porcelain doll, but something different, something unexpected. Melissa's throat tightened. She turned to David, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. His fingers twitched against the bed rail. Melissa started, but she didn't finish. The words that should have come next, "We love him. We'll protect him. He's ours," never arrived. Instead, she swallowed them down. David cleared his throat. "What do we do now? Not how do we care for him? Not what does he need? Just a cold, distant question." Dr. Rachel, sensing the shift in energy, wrapped the baby in a soft blue blanket and gently placed him in Melissa's arms. "Take your time," she said softly, before stepping back. Melissa didn't look at him. She simply held him, arms stiff, her expression unreadable. A mother should feel something in that moment, a surge of love, an unbreakable bond. But all she felt was dread, and deep down, she knew David felt the same. They couldn't take this baby home. 3 days later, the nursery remained untouched. The walls were painted a soft pastel blue. A tiny crib sat beneath a mobile of stars. Plush toys lined the shelves. It was supposed to be a place of warmth and love. Instead, it felt wrong, like it belonged to someone else's child. Melissa sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty crib. David stood by the door, his arms crossed. "We have to do something," he muttered. Melissa knew what he meant. She had known since the moment she first held the baby. But to say it out loud, that would make it real. She inhaled shakily. "What if someone sees us?" David's jaw tightened. "We do it at night." Her stomach twisted. "We do it." The words felt ugly, shameful, but she nodded anyway. That night, when the streets were empty and the city lights flickered against the pavement, they carried their baby out to the car. The drive to the orphanage was silent. Melissa clutched a piece of paper in her lap, the only thing they would leave behind besides the child. The words she had written felt like a lie, but she had convinced herself it was mercy. "We cannot take care of him. Please find him a good home." When they reached the gate, Melissa hesitated, her hands gripping the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby stirred but didn't cry. David nudged her. "Do it." Melissa's breath hitched. She stepped forward, placed the baby down carefully near the entrance, and laid the note beside him. A pause. She could still pick him up. She could still change her mind. But then David pulled her back, and the moment passed. As they drove away, Melissa forced herself not to look in the rearview mirror, because she knew if she saw him one last time, she might never be able to leave. And for the rest of their lives, neither of them would ever forget the night they abandoned their son. The night air was crisp, the city slept in quiet indifference, but at the steps of the orphanage, a newborn baby lay wrapped in a soft blue blanket, unaware that his world had just been rewritten. Inside, the orphanage's head caretaker, Miss Lydia, sat in her tiny office, sorting through stacks of paperwork, when a sudden sharp knock at the door made her freeze. Her instincts told her this wasn't good. Nothing good came at this hour. She opened the door, and her breath caught in her throat. A baby, alone. She immediately scooped him up, his tiny body warm against the chill of the night. He didn't cry. He simply stared at her with round, searching eyes. A folded piece of paper was tucked beneath the blanket. Miss Lydia read the note, her fingers gripping the edges as the words sank in. "We cannot take care of him. Please find him a good home." Her heart tightened. She had seen abandonment before, but something about this child, his silence, his stillness, made it feel even heavier. She traced a gentle hand over his tiny fingers, which curled inward like delicate petals. He was different, and if life had taught her anything, she knew what that meant. This child was in for a hard life, but not if she could help it. The orphanage had seen many children pass through its doors, but this boy was special. Miss Lydia saw it in his quiet resilience, the way he never wailed for attention, the way his eyes held something unshakable. She had always believed names carried power, and so she named him Gabriel. "You are brighter than a shooting star, Gabriel," she whispered one night as she rocked him to sleep. "One day you'll show the world just how extraordinary you are." But the world wasn't ready to see Gabriel's light, and soon he would learn just how cruel people could be. Gabriel grew up surrounded by children just like him, abandoned, forgotten, left behind. But that didn't mean they treated him as one of their own. From an early age, the whispers followed him. "Why does he look like that? What's wrong with his hands? He's weird." Some children shunned him. Others, emboldened by their own insecurities, mocked him openly. He struggled with simple tasks, holding a spoon, tying his shoes, gripping a crayon. When he fumbled, the laughter came sharp and relentless. "Look at him. He can't even eat right. Maybe his parents didn't want him 'cause he's broken." The words cut deep. Even as a child, Gabriel understood the weight of rejection. Miss Lydia did her best to shield him, but she couldn't be there all the time. And Gabriel, no matter how much he wanted to fight back, wasn't strong enough. Not yet. One day, a new boy arrived at the orphanage. His name was Ethan, tall, loud, and quick to take control. Within hours, he became the leader of the pack, the one everyone wanted to follow. The moment Ethan laid eyes on Gabriel, his face twisted with disgust. "What happened to you?" Gabriel didn't answer. He had learned that silence was safer. Ethan wasn't satisfied with silence. That night, as the children gathered in the common room, Ethan decided to make Gabriel his target. "I bet he's cursed," he sneered, nudging a few kids into laughter. "That's why his parents dumped him." Gabriel's hands clenched. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He could have run. He could have curled into himself like always. But something inside him snapped. Slowly, he lifted his chin. He met Ethan's gaze, unblinking. "If I'm cursed, you better be careful," he said evenly. "You might be next." A flicker of hesitation crossed Ethan's face. It was small, but Gabriel saw it. And for the first time in his life, he felt something new. Power. Not the kind that comes from fists or loud voices, but the kind that comes from standing your ground. That night, as he lay in his cot, staring at the cracked ceiling, Gabriel made a promise to himself. They would never break him again. He would rise. He would fight. He would become more than the whispers and the laughter. They called him broken. He would show them he was unstoppable. The years passed, but the whispers never stopped. Gabriel had learned to endure them. He no longer flinched at the cruel words. He no longer shrank when the other children pointed and laughed. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Miss Lydia did what she could. She reminded him daily, "Your worth isn't measured by their words." But some wounds ran deeper than words. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. The orphanage was buzzing with excitement. A local artist had donated supplies, paint, sketchbooks, modeling clay. For most of the children, it was just another distraction, another fleeting moment of fun. For Gabriel, it was a revelation. He sat in a quiet corner with a lump of clay, his fingers uncertain at first. But as he kneaded and shaped, something strange happened. His hands, his so-called broken hands, moved as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. The clay bent and twisted under his touch, not into a simple shape, but into something alive. When he finally looked up, a perfect miniature sculpture of Miss Lydia sat in his hands. Every line, every detail, it was breathtaking. Miss Lydia, who had been watching from across the room, approached slowly. She knelt beside him, her eyes wide with awe. "Gabriel," she whispered, This is extraordinary." For the first time in his life, Gabriel saw something new in someone's eyes when they looked at him. Not pity, not judgment, but wonder. And for the first time, he believed it too. From that day forward, Gabriel spent every free moment sculpting. His fingers, once ridiculed, now breathed life into clay. He sculpted animals with intricate fur patterns. He sculpted people with emotions frozen in stone. He sculpted scenes of beauty, struggle, and triumph. and every time he finished a piece, he felt it, the fire inside him burning brighter. But the other children didn't see it that way. What's so special about some dumb clay? Ethan scoffed one evening, knocking over a half-finished sculpture. Gabriel stared at the shattered pieces, his jaw tight. He could have fought back. He could have yelled. But he didn't. Instead, he picked up the clay, reshaped it, and made something even better. Because that's what he did. He took what was broken and made it beautiful. One rainy afternoon, a woman arrived at the orphanage. Her name was Mrs. Donovan, and she owned an art gallery in the city. She had come to donate supplies, but when she stepped into the common room and saw Gabriel's sculptures, she froze in place. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the breathtaking details of his work. Then she turned to Miss Lydia. "Who made these?" she asked. Miss Lydia smiled proudly. "Gabriel." Mrs. Donovan stared at Gabriel, studying him as if she were seeing something rare and valuable, something the world had overlooked. Then, with a slow, careful smile, she said, "Gabriel, how would you like to have your very own art exhibition?" Silence. The other children stopped what they were doing. Even Ethan, for once, had nothing to say. Gabriel felt his heart pound. An exhibition? His work? In a real gallery? He swallowed hard, afraid to believe it. "Me?" Mrs. Donovan nodded. "Yes, you." And in that moment, something shifted. For years, Gabriel had been the boy nobody wanted, the boy everyone dismissed. But now, he was about to become someone the world couldn't ignore. For weeks, Gabriel worked tirelessly. Mrs. Donovan had promised him a place in her gallery, and he wasn't going to waste it. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was his chance to prove to the world that he was more than what they saw. Miss Lydia helped him prepare, watching in quiet awe as he sculpted late into the night. Each piece he created told a story of struggle, of resilience, of hope. And finally, the day arrived. The gallery was nothing like the orphanage. Polished floors, towering glass windows, soft golden lights illuminating the art. Gabriel stood in the center, his sculptures arranged around him. He had never felt so seen. At first, the room was empty. Then the doors opened, slowly at first. Then all at once, critics, art lovers, even celebrities. They walked in, stopping in their tracks the moment they saw his work. Gasps, whispers, wide eyes filled with disbelief. Mrs. Donovan stood beside him, her smile growing. "Look at them, Gabriel. They don't just see your art. They see you." For the first time in his life, Gabriel wasn't invisible. As the night went on, people approached Gabriel, praising his work. They called him brilliant, a genius, a rare talent. He wasn't the clumsy orphan anymore. He was an artist. And then, near the end of the night, a woman stepped forward. She had purple hair, striking features, and an air of confidence that turned heads. "Gabriel," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Jasmine. I work with a modeling agency. We represent unique beauty. And you, Gabriel, you are exactly what we're looking for." Gabriel blinked. A modeling agency? Him? It sounded ridiculous. He wasn't like the people on magazine covers. He wasn't perfect. Jasmine seemed to sense his hesitation. She smiled. "We believe that being different isn't a flaw, it's power. And Gabriel, you have it." A choice stood before him. He could stay in the world of sculpting, where he was safe, or he could step into something new, something terrifying and unknown. And then he remembered something Miss Lydia always told him. The world will only see you the way you see yourself. Taking a deep breath, he squared his shoulders. "I'll do it." From that moment on, Gabriel's life changed forever. One photo shoot turned into 2, then into a dozen. Soon his face was on billboards, magazine covers, runways. He was no longer just an artist. He was a statement, a movement, a symbol of defiance against beauty standards. The same hands that people once called broken now graced fashion spreads across the world. And the whispers that once followed him, they had turned into applause. But even as he rose higher, something gnawed at him. No matter how famous he became, one truth remained. His parents had abandoned him, and the world might know his name now. Gabriel had spent years proving himself to the world. From abandoned orphan to celebrated artist, from forgotten child to a face recognized across magazines and billboards. He had done what no one thought possible. But no matter how much success he found, one question remained unanswered. One night, After a particularly long day of work, Gabriel scrolled through online comments on an article about him. Most were filled with admiration, people praising his talent, his resilience, his impact. And then he saw it. How could someone abandon a child like that? His parents must be monsters. The words hit like a punch to the gut. He had known his entire life that he was abandoned. But somehow, seeing it spelled out so plainly, written by a stranger who had no idea who he really was, made it feel different. For the first time in years, he couldn't ignore it. Who were they? Why did they leave him? Did they regret it? The questions burned in his mind, and no matter how much he tried to push them aside, he couldn't. It was time to find the truth. Gabriel turned to the only person he trusted with something this big, Miss Lydia. She had always been the one to believe in him, the one to remind him that he was more than his past. If anyone could help him navigate this, it was her. When he told her his plan, she hesitated. "Are you sure, Gabriel? The past can be painful. You've come so far. What if it only brings you pain?" Gabriel met her gaze. "I need to know, no matter what I find." And so, together, they hired Jack Monroe, a seasoned private investigator. Jack had a reputation, cold, relentless, and known for solving cases others couldn't. Gabriel needed answers, and Jack was the man to find them. The investigation began with the orphanage records. Jack analyzed the note left with Gabriel, searching for anything that might trace back to his parents. No fingerprints, no handwriting matches. A dead end. But Jack wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. He expanded the search, tracking down hospital birth records from the time Gabriel was abandoned. Days turned into weeks. Leads came and went. And then, finally, a breakthrough. A birth certificate. Gabriel's birth name. His parents' names, Melissa and David Bennett. And something else. They were still alive, living just 2 cities away. Gabriel's stomach twisted as he stared at the file in front of him. After all these years, he finally had the truth. Now, he had a choice. Did he want to confront them? Did he want answers? Did he want closure? Or would walking away be the better option? Miss Lydia placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you choose, Gabriel, remember this, you don't need them to define you." Gabriel took a deep breath. He had spent his whole life running from his past. But now, he was ready to face it. Gabriel had faced cameras, critics, and crowds that once dismissed him, but nothing compared to this moment. He stood on the front porch of a modest suburban home, gripping the file Jack had given him. Inside this house were the people who had abandoned him. For years, he had wondered, did they ever think about him? Did they regret what they had done? Would they even recognize him? Now, he would find out. Taking a deep breath, he raised his hand and knocked. Seconds passed. Then, footsteps. The door creaked open. A man and a woman stood there, his parents. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Melissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David paled as if he had seen a ghost. Gabriel met their eyes and said the words he had rehearsed 1,000 times. "My name is Gabriel. I believe I am your son." The silence stretched. Melissa swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe. David's mouth opened, but no words came out. They looked frozen in time. Finally, Melissa whispered, This cannot be." David cleared his throat. "Please, come in." Gabriel stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken. His eyes scanned the living room, family pictures on the walls, smiling faces, a warm, lived-in home. But he wasn't in any of those pictures. He had never existed in this house. They sat across from him, still stunned, as if reality hadn't fully set in. Melissa spoke first, her voice trembling. "We did something terrible." Gabriel's fists clenched, but he kept his expression calm. He had come here for answers, not to let anger consume him. David sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "We were young. We were scared." Melissa nodded. "When we saw you, we thought something was wrong, and we couldn't handle it. We convinced ourselves you'd have a better life without us." The words hit like a dull blade, cutting, but not deep enough to destroy him. They hadn't left him out of cruelty. They had left him out of weakness. And yet, that weakness had shaped his entire life. Melissa's voice cracked. "We regretted it every single day." Gabriel studied them. Were they lying? Were they just saying what they thought he wanted to hear? But the pain in their eyes, it was real. For the first time, he saw them not as monsters, but as flawed people who had made an irreversible choice. But was regret enough? Gabriel pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. The screen lit up with photos, his magazine covers, his sculptures, his art exhibitions, moments of triumph that defined his journey. He slid it toward them. "This is who I became without you." Melissa and David stared, speechless. They had abandoned a boy. Now they sat across from a man they didn't know, a man who had built himself from nothing. David swallowed hard. "We don't deserve your forgiveness." Gabriel studied them for a long moment before finally speaking. "Forgiveness isn't about who deserves it, it's about healing." The words felt lighter than he expected. He could have come here seeking revenge, demanding they suffer as he had suffered. But he didn't need their guilt. He didn't need their validation. Instead, he took control of the situation and set the terms for any future relationship. "I have a family now. People who love me because they chose to, not because they had to. But if you truly regret what you did, and if you genuinely want to know me, then I'm willing to give you that chance. The decision is yours." Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. David nodded slowly, as if finally understanding the weight of what they had lost. Gabriel had given them the choice, but for the first time, they had to prove themselves to him. As Gabriel walked out of the house, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. He exhaled, feeling something inside him settle. He had faced his past. He had reclaimed his story, and no matter what they chose next, he was finally free. Back at his apartment, he called Miss Lydia. "How did it go, my dear?" she asked, her voice as warm as ever. Gabriel smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. Not of sadness, but of peace. It went exactly as it was meant to be. Miss Lydia chuckled softly. "I told you, Gabriel. You were always meant for something great." Gabriel glanced at the sculptures in his living room, each one a piece of his journey, a reflection of his struggles and victories. He had spent years proving to the world that being different was beautiful. Tonight, he had proved it to himself. Dear viewers, have you ever judged someone before truly knowing them? Have you ever let fear stop you from embracing something different? We all have choices: to love, to accept, and to forgive. What choice will you make today? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story inspired you, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.